Earlier today, US President Joe Biden signed the Promoting a Resolution to the Tibet-China Dispute Act. Now, the act, also called the Resolve Tibet Act, mandates that the Tibet issue be resolved in accordance with international law. It also states that the resolution should come through peaceful means and dialogue and without any precondition. Ven Khenpo Sonam Tenfel, a member of the Tibetan parliament in exile, thanked the US President Joe Biden and the White House for the signing of the Resolve Tibet Act. Biden signed the bill after the US House of Representatives passed the Resolve Tibet Act in June. Now, the act aims to build pressure on China to resume dialogue with Tibetan leaders. The dialogue, which has been stalled since 2010, sought to arrive at a conclusion regarding Tibet's future. After the passing of the act, a group of 7 US lawmakers visited India's Dharamshala to meet the exiled Tibetan spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama. Now, the visit came as a show of support for the Tibetan cause. The visit, however, did draw strong criticism from Beijing. Beijing has categorized the Dalai Lama as a separatist. During this meeting, too, China urged Washington to recognize the Dalai Lama's anti-China approach and avoid contact with the leader. Now, what is the Resolve Tibet Act? Let's break it down for you. Now, the act supersedes 2 previous acts, namely the Tibetan Policy Act, or the TPA, of 2002 and the Tibetan Policy and Support Act of 2020. The latest act aims at authorizing the use of funds to counter Chinese disinformation about Tibet. This includes disinformation about the history of Tibet, the Tibetan people, and the Tibetan institutions, including that of the Dalai Lama. The act also challenges the Chinese contention that Tibet has been a part of China since ancient times and urges China to sign the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. The act comes as a recognition of Tibetan people to self-determination and human rights. Finally, it also amends the 2002 TPA to define the exact geographical areas which are in fact a part of the Tibetan Autonomous Region. In fact, China also passed laws over what it calls the cause of Taiwan independence. The law addressed the issue of punishing the opinions that, quote-unquote, incited the splitting of China by taking up the Tibetan cause under the secessionist law of the People's Republic of China. The law stated that there is only one China and Taiwan is an inalienable part of the Chinese territory. Now, the acts that Beijing made punishable under its criminal law included initiating the Taiwan independence, attempting to change the legal status of Taiwan as part of China, an attempt to create 2 Chinas, and falsifying that Taiwan is a part of China, among other things like organizing separatist events or dialogues. Now, for more on the US strengthening its support for Tibet negotiations, let me now welcome to this broadcast retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis. Colonel Davis, welcome to the show. Now, he is a military expert and he's also the host of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube, and he joins us from Sterling in Virginia. Colonel Davis, what does this act mean for the people of Tibet, and very importantly, how is China expected to react to it?
Well, certainly for the people of Tibet, it's a lifeline. Gives some international support and encouragement, and I'm sure that they welcome it greatly. I mean, it's a cause that they've been fighting, for so many years. So any kind of support, especially something that's kind of renewed like this one is going to be appreciated. But up the other side of your question, there is what China's going to think about it. To them, it's yet more, quote, meddling in their internal affairs, end quote, that they view, whether it's Taiwan, Tibet, anything else. They of course, view this very much as something that's their own affair to deal with, and like a province of China, et cetera. And they're not going to take very well to it. And especially with this coming right on the heels of the NATO summit, where the United States and the NATO alliance listed China as a new potential threat that they might need to focus on, it's just rankling China all the more. So it's not helping China-U.S. relations, Chinese-Western relations. And again, in the context, when you see, especially this BRICS summit coming up in October of this year, the closening relationship between Russia and China, all these things are not going in a positive direction. And ultimately, I'm not sure that this is even going to help the Tibetan people, because the truth is the United States is not going to put a lot of action behind its words here.
Right. Now, given that the Act states that China's ongoing occupation of Tibet must be resolved per the international law, which is peacefully and not through repression, how is the United States hoping to resolve this? And will China be willing to listen?
Well, I think we just have to be honest and say the United States is not willing to do anything besides issue some statements. I mean, I know what people would like to hear, especially anybody who's a friend of Tibet. They would love to hear that they're going to take more action. I just don't see it coming, because the United States has limited influence that it has, and they're going to be careful about where they take risk and where they don't. And I think that this is what they might call low-hanging fruit in the United States, to where it's an easy thing to do to issue a statement, but they're not going to put any effort into making anything change on the ground. They may issue more statements or more say that we support a peaceful resolution, but it's not going to result in any action. I don't see anything at all on the horizon. And if there was, I think that it would get a very strong negative reaction from China, which also could potentially have actions of their own to counter it, because they don't seem to be in a mood to just take lightly to anything that has to do with what they view as their territorial issues.
In view of developments that came in earlier, in fact, Japan has warned of rising tension over China's military drills near Taiwan, and Taiwan is on alert over waves of missile tests in North China. How do you view the continuing Chinese hegemony in the sea and its policy of flexing muscles at its neighbors? Let's not forget, this is also in the backdrop of China breaking tradition for holding a monthly press conference to answer questions on economic data and skipping the quarterly GDP briefing.
Yeah, and when you even back the lens up just a little bit wider, and this comes on the heels of the new Taiwanese president and in his inauguration speech, to where, at least according to some China watchers, his speech was a lot more independent-minded than previous statements, which angered China. And then you saw what they did. They conducted yet another, quote, what they call punishment military exercise, which showed that they could cut the island off, that they could do a blockade. I mean, they basically rehearsed it again. So everything that moves in this direction is bad for peace, for whether it's Taiwan, Tibet, or that region, and something we need to be very careful about. We have to be awful careful that we don't go so far with words and claims of affirmation that we potentially could actually exacerbate and feed Chinese fears that we're actually going to take some action that would lead to independence for any of these countries here, that could, make it easier for them to take action. I don't see that on the horizon at the moment, and I don't think this is going to be that spur, but it could be just another log on that fire moving in that direction. And I think America needs to be very, very careful about how it acts.
So you wouldn't really say that China is perhaps trying to deflect attention from its domestic economic issues, considering we did speak about its skipping?
It certainly is. And listen, that's also a factor in maybe mitigating the possibility of military action, because any kind of a war, and just ask Russia and Ukraine and the European Union for that matter, how draining to support a war is on their economies. And obviously China's economy is starting to wobble and has a lot of negative signs. And if you choose to fight a war, it could have significant negative ramifications on you, especially heading into October.
Okay, thanks, Colonel Davis, for joining us today with your insights.
Always my pleasure. Thank you.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.